Um, I appreciate your time today. I apologize. My camera is seeming to be a little blurry. And I'm not totally sure what the cause of that is. But I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you all for coming. I will do my best not to take up too much of it. Um, my name is Luke Decker. I'm an attorney here with Sieber Walker Paget. We are a eminent domain landowner only law firm. We had got word of this Buffalo Flats to Delaware transmission line project and wanted to reach out to landowners to, kind of explain what we do. Hopefully, we can provide some information to people that'll, give them some better understanding of what eminent domain is, what the process is, what this can really mean. I understand that for this project in particular, this might be a little bit early because I think everybody who signed up, nobody has offers yet. And, I was doing some research on the project and I understand it's still kind of in the planning, get community feedback on where the line is going to be. Um, and so this might not be super applicable to folks yet. But like I said, the goal of this is to just give you guys some information about eminent domain and what we do, and hopefully put you guys in a spot where you can make an informed decision when the time does come, if you guys do start getting offers. So if you give me a second here, I'm going to pull up um, my PowerPoint here for this. So here we go. Yes, this is the Buffalo Flats to Delaware transmission line project, 345 kilovolts, which is certainly on the bigger side of what these transmission lines can look like. And I think that's going to have some meaningful consequences for people. So a little bit about us. I work at Seaver Walker Paget is the name of our firm. As I said, we are an eminent domain landowner attorney. So what does that mean? As you can see here, all we do is eminent domain. We really don't do any other kind of work. Power lines, pipelines, road projects, highways getting built, public utilities need to get built out, anything where the government is taking people's land, and then we work exclusively on the landowner side of that. Never done any work for any condemning authorities. I have no relationships with any of the pipeline companies, the pipeline companies, any of the state condemners. And we really feel like that puts us in a spot where we're one of the few firms in the nation that have as much experience working for landowners in eminent domain as we do. At this point, we've seen a lot. I won't say we've seen it all because there's always, new stuff coming and every piece of land is unique. However, we have a lot of experience doing this and we feel like that allows us to, be the best option to represent people when the time does come. I'll get into the contingency and the group negotiating power a little bit later on. But this is just a little slide about who we are. And, hopefully lets you know that we know what we're talking about. Here is a little slide about the project itself. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this already, but it's going from the Buffalo Flats Substation, which is kind of my understanding is on the west side of Kansas a bit. It comes down and it's running along the southern edge of the Kansas border, kind of near where it borders with Oklahoma. 133 miles, so that's pretty real. That's one of the longer power lines. There's gonna be a lot of folks who get affected. Um, yeah, as I mentioned, 345 kilovolts. So again, it's gonna be one of the bigger structures. I wouldn't be all that surprised if they're coming through with the big like A-frames that you imagine, where they have to clear out a whole corridor. They're wiping out trees, they're wiping out farmland to get this built. It's pretty significant. Their target in service date is 2029. So, obviously we're still kind of on the front end of stuff. As I had mentioned, The right of way width, that's gonna depend on where it's cutting through people's property. But I think you'd expect the width of the easement they need to take to be anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70 feet, maybe, wide as a corridor coming through your property. And I can get this information to anybody after if they're interested. Um, So here is a little bit about, what's eminent domain, right? Like I know a lot of people have probably some idea, of what this is, but what does it really mean? How does it really play out? And from the landowner's perspective, like what can you expect? Um, so it says here on the first slide, eminent domain is just it's an inherent power that our founding fathers had decided that, that the government needs. It's this power to take private land for public use. Now, as I'm sure you folks are questioning, how much of this public use is a huge transmission line going through my yard? There's some more power getting built, right? There's some energy infrastructure, but are any of us here in this community going to really see a benefit from this? That's hard to say. Unfortunately, it's a pretty low bar for what um, for public benefit means. And so for the most part, they're able to get this approval pretty quickly to get this eminent domain power. And let me back up, I guess, when I say that, because the government bodies are able to delegate that power to private companies or even public utility companies like here. Um, but there's a few steps that they have to go through first to get that power. However, it's a pretty low bar. Um, And then there's the fair market value part, which I mentioned a little bit. I mean, the fair market value, it's kind of a weird thing, right? I mean, it can mean different things to different people. I think if you're the owner of land in a typical transaction, you get to say what the fair market value is, right? You can say, no, this is my property. I'll sell it to you for X. Um, it gets in a little weird with eminent domain because we have to try and simulate what a willing buyer and a willing seller would transact at, is really the standard for the value of the land being taken. And as you can all imagine, that doesn't really do much to really lay things out. I mean, the power line company is going to have an idea of what they think that would transact at. You're going to have a different idea of what that would transact at. And you could ask 100 people, get 100 different answers on the value. But that's, that question of what is that just compensation, is a big one. And, that's what we're here to do for folks, is making sure they're maximizing that part of it. Um, this is just a little bit of an infographic slide, a little bit. Um, this is the eminent domain versus condemnation slide. These terms get thrown around a lot and used interchangeably. So, and you may hear them both used interchangeably. And there are some slight differences, which is why I want to just take a minute to show this little breakdown to hopefully create some clarity for people who might get, just confused by all these terms getting used. The eminent domain, as I said, that's that inherent power in the government to have the right to take. The condemnation is the process through which that eminent domain power is used, right? So the condemnation is the actual process of filing the lawsuit to take the land from people. And so eminent domain condemnation, two very similar terms, two sides of the same coin, but there are some differences, and hopefully this can give you a little bit of idea of the difference at least. So what's the condemnation process look like in Kansas? Um, there's a few steps that the power line company is going to have to get through in order to be able to get access to your land if you don't cut a deal with them first. Really, to start it off, because of the power line company, they have to get the eminent domain power first from the state. And that involves getting a permit from the Kansas Corporation Commission. It was called a siting permit. This is where I believe they're in the process at right now, where they have to get approvals on, hey, this is what the route's going to look like. Here's some possible options. Here's why we chose certain routes. Here's why this project itself we have to justify. Um, and there's some hoops they have to jump through. There's some community feedback requirements that I believe are ongoing right now, is my understanding. Um, and so eventually they'll get through that and they will get the eminent domain power. So then once they have the eminent domain power and they've got a pretty good idea on what the route is going to look like, they will then um, start giving notice to landowners. That's typically in the form, I say typically, it really should say on the slide, they have to make you an offer. They have to make you an initial offer in writing. Um, hey, this is how much we're taking 1 acre of your land to build this power line. Here's, an offer for whatever, $20,000. What I don't know what the number offers are going to shake out to be. And then after they make you an offer, they have a procedural requirement that they have to make good faith negotiations. Now, what is a good faith negotiation? How much work actually has to get put into that? How much of a real effort do they have to make to satisfy that requirement? In my experience, it's not what you would hope a good faith negotiation is. They basically just have to make some attempt to work with you. I've seen a lot where they kind of say, hey, we made you an offer, take it or we're going to sue you. And that's how that goes a lot of the time. But typically, I think with power line companies, they do have some more willingness to try and genuinely negotiate with people because they don't want to have to sue people if they don't. They want to get this power line up. And so I would expect most people will have an opportunity to negotiate pre-lawsuit, but it is written into the Kansas code that they have to make some good faith negotiations. Um, so after that, if there's no deal struck and after some negotiations, then they're able to file a condemnation lawsuit. Condemnation lawsuit is basically them just going through the court to get rights to your land, to be able to get the easement that they're looking for. In Kansas, how it works, they'll file a lawsuit. Everybody has to get service of the lawsuit. But then once everybody's been served, the court will usually hold some type of initial hearing. At that hearing is typically when you have the right to challenge their right to use eminent domain. This is one that we don't recommend people spend too much time fighting, at least at this point. If you want to fight the power line before it gets any of this and before they get past the Kansas Corporation Commission, that is the time to fight it. If you've already been sued for the land, chances are that your ability to fight that is not going to go well for you. And the reality is, people end up spending a lot on legal fees to fight that just to end up back in the same spot as they were. So that's, maybe a little bit doom and gloom, but that's kind of just the reality of how it goes once you get to this point. Um, so then after that hearing has been held and it's been deemed okay, this company, this plaintiff, which they'd be at that point when they're suing you, has the right to take. The judge will then appoint 3 neutral appraisers. They're usually local people who sometimes they own lands. I think they typically have to at least have 2 actual certified appraisers, but even sometimes just one person being an owner of land in the area is a requirement. But those 3 people will take some time, go see the property, and then they will come back with an award of, hey, we think this is what the property being taken is worth. At that point, that number comes back with the court. Both sides, landowner and the power line company, have the ability to file an exception to that. If that, we file a lot of these because the court appointed appraisers are often not giving us the numbers we want to get. And so if you file the exception to whatever amount they award, you are basically saying, we don't agree to that. we want to move towards a jury trial. And so if either side files an exception to that court appointed award, you have that right to object and you can demand a jury trial. And, at that point, it just kind of becomes a regular lawsuit where, you have to get evidence to support whatever value you want, of higher value. That's typically in the form of, getting an appraiser because they're going to have an appraisal at that point. And so you'd want to get your own independent appraisal. Ideally, you can find somebody who doesn't do a lot of work for states at all or for condemning authorities, and somebody who has experience in doing condemnation appraisals, and somebody who has a lot of experience doing it on behalf of landowners. Those are some things we'd be looking for. And then, there's some discovery, and then, you get to trial, and it's basically they're going to have an appraiser saying, this is what we think it's worth. You'll have your appraiser say, this is what we think it's worth. This is why their valuation is wrong and not enough. And then it goes to a jury, basically gets to decide. And then it's, you can appeal and things after that. But it really, at the end of the day, if you take it all the way to the end, will come down to a jury deciding on how much you're going to get paid. And I should say too that throughout this whole process, especially after initial offers have been made, we always have settlement negotiations going on. Very few of the cases I'd say really end up going all the way to trial. It's only if there's a big spread between what we think it's worth and what they think it's worth, and there's no way to bridge that gap, is typically when these things end up all the way to jury trial. But most of the time, there's some way to kind of meet in the middle and get something done without having to take it that far and invest landowner resource, people just spending $4,000 to $5,000 on getting an appraisal done to go to trial. Like, depending on what the size you're taking is, that doesn't always economically make sense for people. But that's something to, worry about down the road if you find yourself in that position. Um, so, as part of the eminent domain process, condemnation process, there's really two negotiations that are involved that are really critical for landowners. The first one I think goes under the radar a little bit because it's non-monetary. It's not quite as sexy as money is, for lack of a better term. But it's really important because that easement agreement is going to be what governs the relationship between you and the power line forever. And they write those in a way that very friendly to them. Their goal is to get as much access to your property, take as many rights away from you as possible, allow them to do whatever they want in that easement area. And, you have to know how to negotiate back against that. I think having an experienced attorney helps kind of know what things to look out for. But even if you don't hire an attorney, I would really emphasize the importance of making sure you are reviewing the easement and asking for changes on parts that you don't like. It's just that part kind of goes under the radar. The other part of this is compensation. That's a big part of it as well, and that's where we make our money. Which I'll get into a little bit at the end. But that's obviously a big part of it that it's really important folks make sure that they feel like they got at least a decent deal, because if you feel like you got screwed later on, you can't really go back and try and make a new deal. So the easement, why it matters. I mean, I just said it, but it's the document that's going to govern the relationship between you and the power line company forever, or as long as you own the land, or whoever owns the land after you, if after you pass away, or kids are going to own it, they're going to be subject to what this easement says that the power line company is able to do. Um, as it kind of says here on the left, oral promises made by the right-of-way agents are not anything you can rely on. It's very important that anything you negotiate about the process or the taking itself is reflected in the easement. Here on the right are some just honestly typically ones we see. These are a lot of ones that even if I'm working with a landowner and they never ask me for any specific easement negotiation, like these are a lot of things that I would be fighting for regardless. making sure they don't get unlimited access to your property and that they can just do whatever they want to the rest of your property. Um, it sounds crazy, but these easements get written in very broad ways that, allow them to have that type of access to property. Making sure there's clauses about future, damage and crop loss. It's maybe a little less applicable on a power line, but we do a lot of pipeline work where they have to dig a, 3, 4 foot trench through farmland and they're ripping up tile and they're ripping up the dirt and, all of a sudden this whole row is not very tillable for a while. And, that affects output year, 2 years down the road, making sure that you have an ability to compensate for that later on. Making sure that they're keeping the topsoil and subsoil separated so that when the construction's done, they put the subsoil back in and then the topsoil so that the ground is still usable. Um, yeah, you mean limiting them to one power line. These things often get written in ways that if you don't look, it actually gives them the right to construct as many power lines as they want in the easement area. Um, And so, these are just a few of them. Every piece of property is going to have specific things that need to be accounted for. But these are some terms that I would recommend people try and focus on and make sure you're getting some concessions on these. Whether you hire us, you don't hire anybody or hire somebody else. So compensation, this is, what you're owed. I've said it a few times already. One thing I'll say about this, just to start, is that whatever your first offer is it's not the final best offer. I've worked a lot of these cases and I try and take the ones that have a lot of upside, right? But I can say with confidence that regardless of whatever offer you get, there's always at least some more money on the table. And so that's something to keep in mind that they're going to present the first offer they make to you as if, hey, this is a, super thorough analysis we did. Here's, this is the true market value of the property. This is a strong deal. You should take this. When you can't trust anything they say. Yeah, and now I'm starting to repeat myself a little bit, but making sure that if there is topsoil damage or things like that, making sure that you're compensated for that. The other really big one is the residual damage to the remaining property. There's kind of two buckets of these damages, right? There's the land actually being taken, and for a power line like this, it's gonna be a strip of land, 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acres, however much land, and then there's the remaining property. And how is the remaining property affected by this power line? The shocker, I think the answer is that it's worth less now. But that decrease in value of the remaining property of what it used to be to what it is worth now, that gap, you're entitled to that. And it's very important that you get paid on that. Because again, as I mentioned, if you find out in 3 years, hey, I didn't get paid for this drop in my property value, you can't come back and ask for more at that point. So it's really critical that that's something that people are taking into consideration. If you ask me, a 345 kilovolt power line coming through people's land is going to have some real effects on what the remaining property is worth after. And so that's a very big thing, making sure that that's something you take into consideration. Um, the rest of these get a little bit more, they're more property specific on just if there's livestock, there's fencing, tiling that are being disrupted, making sure these are things we bring in. I think timber is another big one I deal with a lot that, they got to clear out all these mature trees to create the corridor for where this power line is going to go. It can get tricky evaluating trees, but those are something that they're going to offer you like $300 a tree for these mature trees that are getting taken out. And, anybody who knows anything knows that that's not even close to being enough. So there's just some things to be aware of. Um, so what do you do when you receive an offer? I don't know exactly when this is going to be. My understanding for this one is that a lot of people have not received offers yet. I think everybody who made a reservation for this webinar had selected they did not receive an offer yet. But Keep this handy for whenever that time does come. Just a few basic things. I mean, the first one, I wouldn't meet in person with these right-of-way agents the most you can. I believe that all of you are not suspect to just being, bullied into taking a deal. But if you can create physical space between you and the right-of-way agent, that just helps take any pressure they are able to apply off and allow you a little more space to think about things. The second point kind of goes to that as well. Just tell them, hey, because they're going to be pressuring you to like sign now. You got to sign now. You got to sign soon. Tell you, hey, I need a little time to think this through. You can try and schedule something with that, later on. Contact and experience. I'm an main attorney. Obviously, we hope that you'll at least talk with us. But I totally understand if there's existing relationships. You decide, hey, why? I don't know if I want to hire this guy. He's not in Kansas. Um, but I would talk to an attorney at the very least. I think, and I'm not just saying this, but I think eminent domain, from what I've found out, is kind of a weird part of the law that most lawyers who don't specialize in it don't really understand the nuances of. Um, the concepts themselves are not too difficult, but how to actually handle these. Most attorneys I talk to that are not familiar end up kind of stumbling and bumbling a little bit. And so that's where I would just, even if it's somebody else who's more local, who's an eminent domain attorney, have them take a look at it. Hopefully they'll do it for free, like a complimentary review. That's fairly common within eminent domain attorneys. Um, connect with your neighbors. I think this is a really important one. Um, the power line company would prefer if nobody knows what the person next to them is getting offered or what they're settling cases at. If everybody gets a $10,000 offer and your neighbor negotiated up to 30 grand, the power line company doesn't want you to know that. And so that's why I really encourage talking with neighbors as much as you can, spreading that information, and then, and I'm a little hesitant to get too much into this only because I know it's too early, but ultimately too, if you can get a group of landowners all signed up with the same attorney, that really creates a leverage in negotiation because now the power line company can negotiate for 5, 10, 20 easements all at the same time, which they really want to get. And that really does help raise everybody's floor of what they can get paid. And that's where I think once that floor has kind of been brought up for everybody, is where you have to go back to negotiating individual deals because again, each piece of property is so unique that it's going to have its own challenges. But I'm not just saying this to try and get more people to sign up with me. I've done enough of these that I've seen real differences between having a group of landowners together and just working one-off cases with people. And we have a lot more success in smoothly negotiating deals when we have landowners together because the power line company goes, hey, maybe we're overpaying, but we can lock up these 10 easements right now, and that saves them a lot of headache. And not having to sue people, which they prefer not to do. And then, I think documenting everything is important as well to the best you can. What not to do when you receive an offer. I mean, this is a little bit of what I just rehashed, but I wouldn't negotiate anything with the right-of-way agent to start. I wouldn't talk numbers with them before you've done some research. Yeah, I think, jumping the gun and hiring an appraiser before you hire an attorney, it probably will be fine, but it might be an unnecessary expense and it potentially could hurt you if you don't get a high enough value that you want. And so, you guys can read this. There's not, I feel like I'm rehashing a lot of the same things at this point. But give yourself space to make a decision. And if you can, speak with an expert. Um, this is just another slide on the same thing of these tactics right-of-way agents will use to get people to sign. They'll say stuff like, hey, we're paying you 150% of market value. What does that mean? Who's determining market value? You're determining market value. Well, we have a different opinion of what that looks like, and you're not paying 150% of it. And stuff like that they say that makes you feel like, oh, I got to sign now or I'm missing out on a deal, when that's really not ever the case, honestly. As I said, this earlier initial damages are always way too low for crops and timber. If you're not negotiating that hard, they're going to screw you on that. Um, yeah, I mean, bonus payments get a little weird. Verbal promises again, and you got to have everything in the easement that they promise you. Otherwise, you can't count on them holding their word on anything. And yeah, if they tell you, yeah, you don't need an attorney, I mean, I don't think you need me to tell you that, that's a red flag. So hopefully this is things you can recognize. Hopefully this gives you guys some information on how to handle this. How you can afford an attorney. This is most a little bit how we operate. But as I'm sure all you people know, most attorneys work on like an hourly basis or some type of upfront retainer, to even get started. We do not work that way. We work on a contingency fee basis. So that means we only get paid if we deliver for you above what you've already been offered. So nothing to get signed up. Really nothing throughout the whole process until the end. And our contingency fee is based only on what we add on top of your initial offer. So whatever you've already been offered, that money will stay in your pocket. Our fee is based on, hey, what can we add on top of that? And obviously here's a few points about that. That puts us on the same side of the fence, right? Because we're both incentivized to get you as much money as possible, because the more money I get you means the more money I'm getting paid. Um, and we find that, just it tends to work well when we're aligned in the same way. If you were paying me hourly, my incentive would be to work as much as possible, results be damned to some extent, because I'm getting paid by the hour. But that's not the case here. We're incentivized to do what makes sense, what's actually going to move things forward and be useful, and not be wasting anybody's time trying to deliver good results, without too much beating around the bush. Um, so I can explain more about that if anybody's interested in exactly how the fee works, but something to know that there's no fee to talk with us, get signed up. We only get paid on the back end stuff. Um, so here's this is the last slide here. Um, as I said, whenever the time comes that people here do get offers, I would recommend hiring, or I don't know if hiring, but talking to somebody, an attorney who knows what the process of eminent domain looks like, what do offers look like, what do easement terms look like, what are some things you need to be protected on. Talk to your numbers. I can't emphasize this enough. I think getting groups of neighbors together is just useful at any point in time in the process. And then, if you're interested in us at all, you can send your offer to me for free. We offer totally complimentary, no strings attached. Offer reviews. You can send it to me, with your offer. Usually it'll have like, it'll tell you how much they're going to pay you. It'll have the easement agreement, which is going to be this big block text, probably a few pages. And then it'll have usually a plat, like a bird's eye view plat showing exactly where the easement corridor is going to be cutting through your yard or for your property. Feel free to send that to us. I would be happy to, walk through that with you, answer any questions you have, about your offer of the process, and hopefully then we can, show you how we can add value, and hopefully you understand why, it makes sense to hire an attorney or hire us. But certainly, no pressure. I do plenty of these where I do these reviews with people on their offers and they decide, hey, thank you, but we're gonna move on our own, or we're gonna move on this other way. So genuinely no strings attached. Offer reviews, and then if you want to hire us, obviously we can move forward from there. Um, so here's my contact info at the bottom here. I hope that everybody who got a letter to sign up for this was able to attend. As I had mentioned, I believe that I'm a little bit early on this in terms of where we come in. Um, we're not the attorneys that are going to be the ones up there trying to fight and stop this whole power line from coming. But once the eminent domain process gets real, we're here to preserve landowner rights the best we can, and making sure people, get paid appropriately. And so that is the end of my presentation here. Um, I will hang out for a little bit if anybody um, has any questions in the chat. We could probably put some in there. Otherwise, feel free to just reach out to me. That's my cell phone number down there, the 219 number. The Luke at swplegal.com is my email address. Feel free to hit me up with any question you guys have about the process. Again, the goal of this was just to give you guys some information about just eminent domain in general. What does this process look for me like as a landowner? What are some things I can expect? And I just want to put you guys in an informed position so that you're making informed decisions, and not making emotional ones or anything like that. So again, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I appreciate your time, and I hope to hear from you, and I hope you guys keep me in mind once you do receive offers. But thanks for coming, and I hope this was useful. I don't really know how to stop this. Here we go. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I'm not really seeing anything in the chat. I'm honestly not 100% sure I got it set up right anyway. But like I said, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Thank you all.